"Excuse me, but I don't think you understand," the elderly woman said, her voice calm but unwavering, like the stillness before a storm. The officer paused, his hand still hovering in the air, ready to deliver his next command. He turned slowly to look at the woman, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. She stood before him, dressed simply, feeding the stray cats that wandered the park like they had for years. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and despite her age, her posture was perfect, dignified, like a woman who had seen more than most would ever imagine. But it was her eyes that caught his attention. They weren't just eyes. They were the eyes of someone who had been through battles and emerged victorious. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice filled with mockery, though he couldn't hide the slight tremble beneath his words. Clara Johnson didn't flinch. She didn't need to. The officer, Officer John Miller, had no idea who he was speaking to, and his arrogance blinded him to the truth. To him, she was just an elderly woman, an old, frail woman with nothing but a few stray cats as companions. What he didn't know was that Clara had once held the power to change lives, to uphold the law, and to make decisions that shook entire systems. She was a retired federal judge, someone whose decisions had once echoed through the halls of justice. But today, she was here in the park, quietly feeding the stray cats that no one else bothered with, an act of kindness in a world that often overlooked the small things. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but you're causing a disturbance," Officer Miller said, his tone now more authoritative, but Clara could see the uncertainty in his eyes. He had expected her to cower, to apologize, to comply. He had not expected this calm, collected woman who stood her ground without raising her voice. She didn't need to. "I'm not here to cause trouble, officer," Clara replied, her voice steady, though a slight smile tugged at the corner of her lips. "I'm simply feeding these cats. It's a simple act of kindness, something I've done every day for the last few months. Perhaps if you spent more time here, you'd understand the peace that comes from such small things." Officer Miller's lips curled into a tight sneer. He stepped closer, looming over her as though he could intimidate her with his size, his uniform, his badge. "I said, you need to leave now," he snapped, his patience running thin. Clara didn't move. Instead, she lifted her head slightly, meeting his gaze. "I have every right to be here, and I'm not going anywhere." Her words were soft, but they carried a weight that made Officer Miller pause. For a moment, he felt an unfamiliar tug in his chest, a hesitation that confused him. Was this really the elderly woman he was supposed to push around? The one he could make go away with a few harsh words? He took a step back, his mind trying to make sense of what was happening. "You're disturbing the peace," he muttered, clearly annoyed. "I'm calling for backup." Clara took a deep breath, her eyes softening as she glanced down at the cats, who were peacefully eating from the small dish she had set out for them. "You can call whoever you want, but I'm not leaving. I've been through much worse than you, officer, and I've faced far more than you could ever imagine." Officer Miller's face twitched at her words. He wasn't used to this, used to people breaking under the pressure, people apologizing, people shrinking before authority. But Clara wasn't shrinking. Clara wasn't apologizing. Clara was standing firm, as if the years of serving in court, the years of standing before criminals and the powerful, had taught her one thing. The only thing that could defeat her now was fear. And fear wasn't something she would show. She stood tall, unwavering, as the officer grew more agitated. "You think you're above the law, don't you?" he growled. "No," Clara said, her voice calm but firm. "I know the law, and I respect it. But I also know the difference between right and wrong. You've crossed that line today." The officer took a step back, unsure how to proceed. This wasn't what he had expected, and for the first time that day, he found himself questioning his actions. But before he could say another word, Clara spoke again. "You may have a badge, officer, but remember, not all power is visible. Sometimes, it's quiet, like the power of truth. And today, you've made a mistake. But don't worry, the world has a way of correcting those." Clara Johnson stood still, her hands folded neatly in front of her, as the officer paced back and forth, his footsteps echoing through the quiet park. The soft sound of rustling leaves was the only thing breaking the tension that hung heavily in the air. Officer Miller's eyes were fixed on the ground, his mind racing, trying to make sense of the situation. He had never expected to encounter someone like Clara today, especially not in this park. He had dealt with 1,000 other incidents, each more predictable than the last. But Clara was different. There was something about her calm demeanor, something unshakable in the way she stood there, as if she had seen everything life could throw at her and had come out stronger for it. He was used to seeing fear in people's eyes when he confronted them. Fear, submission, apology. But Clara's eyes, those eyes, they held something far more powerful. And that power unsettled him. "You're not getting away with this," he muttered to himself, more to reassure his own faltering confidence than anything else. He glanced up at Clara, but she didn't respond. She didn't need to. She already knew what he was thinking. The officer's mind kept drifting back to her words. I've been through much worse than you. I've faced far more than you could ever imagine. Those words lingered in the air like a challenge he couldn't quite understand. Was she threatening him? No, it didn't feel like that. It felt like a truth he wasn't ready to face. He cleared his throat, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling growing in his chest. "I'm calling this in," he said, his voice slightly sharper now, as though trying to reassert control. Clara's gaze remained steady, never wavering. "You can call anyone you want," she said softly, her voice still calm, but with a firmness that made the officer hesitate once again. "But it won't change the truth." The officer's hand moved toward his radio, but then it stopped midair. He could feel it, the presence of the truth hanging between them. The truth that Clara wasn't just a helpless old woman. She wasn't just some frail figure to be pushed around. She was more. And he knew, deep down, that he had underestimated her in the worst possible way. He finally lowered his hand, his grip tightening around the radio, as if it might somehow ground him. "What exactly do you think you're going to do about this?" he asked, trying to regain control of the situation, but his voice lacked the force it had moments ago. Clara took a step closer, her heels making a soft sound against the pavement. "You don't know who I am, do you, officer?" she asked, her voice still steady, but with an edge now. He glanced at her, narrowing his eyes. "I don't need to know who you are," he said, trying to sound confident. But the words felt hollow. "I just need to make sure you're out of here before I get back up." Clara didn't respond immediately. She simply looked at him, her gaze unwavering. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small, worn leather wallet. She flipped it open, revealing a badge that gleamed in the afternoon sun. Officer Miller's eyes widened as he saw the words on the badge, "Retired Federal Judge, Clara Johnson." His heart skipped a beat, and for the first time in his life, he felt the weight of the badge he had once worn so proudly. He took a step back, his mind racing. He had just threatened a retired judge. A federal judge. Clara's eyes softened just slightly, a knowing look in them. She closed the wallet and slipped it back into her bag. "I don't expect you to understand, officer," she said, her voice almost gentle now. "But I do expect you to respect the law. And that means no one is above it. Not you, not me, not anyone." The officer swallowed hard, his throat dry. He could feel the sweat on his brow, but he couldn't wipe it away. His hands were trembling slightly, and he couldn't tell if it was from the heat of the afternoon sun or the cold realization that he had made a grave mistake. He took another step back, his eyes never leaving Clara's. "I'm sorry," he muttered, the words escaping him before he could stop them. Clara nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "I know," she said simply, and with that, she turned, walking away from him, her steps slow and deliberate. She didn't look back. Officer Miller stood there, frozen in place, watching her retreating figure until she disappeared from view. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure what to do next. The next morning, Officer Miller found himself in a different place than he had been the day before. He sat at his kitchen table, a cup of lukewarm coffee in his hand, but his mind was far from the steaming mug. His thoughts kept drifting back to Clara Johnson, the elderly woman who had stood her ground and revealed herself to be a retired federal judge. He couldn't shake the image of her calm, unwavering presence. She had spoken to him with a quiet authority that had shaken him to his core, and he couldn't figure out why it had affected him so deeply. The more he thought about it, the more he realized how wrong he had been. He had been so quick to judge her, to dismiss her as just another old woman who didn't belong in the park, someone beneath him. But Clara Johnson had not been beneath him. She had been a figure of strength, a reminder of something he had lost somewhere along the way. Officer Miller had built his career on authority, on the power that came with wearing the uniform. He had never questioned it, never needed to. But Clara had shown him how easily that power could be misused, how fragile it really was. As he sat there, the weight of his actions settled heavily on his chest. He had humiliated Clara without knowing who she was, and in doing so, he had crossed a line that could not be undone. He thought back to her words, "I've been through much worse than you could ever imagine." What had she meant by that? What had she endured in her life that made her stand so unshaken before him? He took a deep breath and set the coffee cup down. The guilt gnawed at him. He had to make things right. He stood up, his mind made up. Clara Johnson had been more than just a victim in this situation. She had been a teacher, a quiet force who had reminded him of the very values he had sworn to protect. He wasn't going to let this go. He couldn't. He picked up his phone and dialed the number for the police department. The line clicked, and a voice answered on the other end. "Officer Miller," he said, his voice steady but firm. "I need to report an incident, a misunderstanding that I need to correct." The dispatcher on the other end didn't say anything for a moment, likely surprised at the tone of his voice. But then the words came. "What kind of incident?" she asked, the curiosity evident. "I need to apologize," he said, the words heavy with the weight of his realization. "There was a woman I encountered yesterday in the park. An elderly woman. I made some serious mistakes, and I need to make sure she knows I'm sorry." The dispatcher was silent for a moment, unsure of what to say. But Officer Miller wasn't finished. "I need to find her. Can you help me?" he asked, his voice now more determined. After a brief pause, the dispatcher gave him the information he needed. Clara lived in a small, modest apartment just a few blocks away from the park. Officer Miller thanked her and quickly grabbed his jacket, leaving his apartment with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in a long time. As he walked to his car, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to do something that would change his life. He didn't know what it would be yet, but he knew he couldn't leave things the way they were. Clara had left an impression on him, one that would not fade so easily. It took only a few minutes for him to reach Clara's apartment building. He parked his car and walked up the stairs to her door, his heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't sure what to expect. He didn't know if she would want to see him, or if she would even accept his apology. But he knew he had to try. He knocked softly on the door, his knuckles barely making a sound. A few moments passed before the door creaked open, revealing Clara standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable. She didn't say anything at first. She just looked at him, those same calm eyes from yesterday studying him. Officer Miller opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He took a breath and tried again. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice sincere. "I was wrong. I treated you unfairly, and I made assumptions about you that weren't right. You didn't deserve that." Clara didn't immediately respond. She just stood there, waiting for him to continue. He looked down at the ground for a moment, gathering his thoughts before speaking again. "I didn't know who you were, but that doesn't excuse my actions. I should have treated you with respect from the beginning. I want to make that right." Clara's eyes softened slightly, but she didn't speak. Instead, she stepped back, allowing him to enter. He hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. Clara led him to the small living room, where the faint scent of old books and coffee lingered in the air. It was a simple, cozy space, with shelves filled with books and photos on the walls. He couldn't help but feel out of place in such a peaceful, humble environment. "I'm not the one who needs to forgive you," Clara finally said, her voice low but steady. "You need to forgive yourself." Officer Miller looked at her, surprised by her words. "I didn't expect you to say that," he admitted. Clara smiled faintly, the expression barely there but enough to convey understanding. "It's not about me, officer. It's about you. You've got to live with your actions, but that doesn't mean you can't change." The words hung in the air like a challenge, one that Officer Miller wasn't sure he was ready to face, but one he knew he had to. He nodded slowly, finally understanding what she meant. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. Clara had given him something he hadn't expected, the chance to make things right. The days that followed felt different for Officer Miller. The weight that had been hanging over him seemed to lift, but only slightly. He found himself looking at the world with a new set of eyes that no longer saw people through the lens of authority alone. It was as if Clara Johnson had cracked open a door he had kept locked for so long, and now he could see things differently. He started to notice the small gestures of kindness around him, the quiet moments where people showed compassion to one another, and it struck him how often he had overlooked these things before. Each morning, As he prepared for his shift, he found himself questioning what it meant to truly serve and protect. It wasn't just about issuing tickets, making arrests, or upholding the law. It was about understanding, about seeing the humanity in everyone, especially those who were often invisible. He had never thought about it this way before. It wasn't until that fateful encounter with Clara that he realized how much his perspective had been shaped by the uniform, by the badge, by the power that came with it. He spent the following days reflecting on his past actions, particularly how he had treated people who were different from him. He knew he couldn't undo the harm he had caused, but he could start making things right. That afternoon, he found himself once again standing outside Clara's apartment building. It had been a week since their last conversation, and he had done a lot of thinking since then. He knew he needed to show Clara that he had learned something from their encounter. He needed to do more than apologize. He needed to act. With a deep breath, he walked up the stairs and knocked on Clara's door. This time, when she opened it, her expression was different, softer, as if she too had been waiting for this moment. "Hello, officer," Clara said, her voice warm but with a hint of cautious curiosity. "Clara, I've been thinking a lot about what we talked about," he said, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "And I've realized something important. It's not enough to say I'm sorry. I need to do more. I want to help." Clara raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Help? Help with what?" she asked, her tone skeptical but not dismissive. "I want to help the community. I want to start volunteering, to make a difference in ways that go beyond my job. I've been talking to some people, and I think I can use my position to do more good. But I need your guidance. I don't know where to start." Clara paused for a moment, studying him, as if weighing his sincerity. She didn't say anything at first, but finally, she nodded. "It's a big commitment, officer. But if you're serious, I'll help you. There's a lot of work to be done, especially when it comes to understanding the struggles that people like me go through every day. It's not just about handing out food or writing a check. It's about connecting with people, listening to them, and showing them that they matter." Officer Miller nodded, a sense of purpose beginning to settle within him. "I'm ready for that. I want to learn. I've spent too many years focused on enforcing the law without understanding the people I was supposed to be protecting. I don't want to make that mistake again." Clara stepped aside, allowing him to enter. "Then let's get started," she said simply. As they sat down together, Clara began to share stories from her years as a judge, from the cases that had shaped her career to the moments when she had seen the system fail those who needed it most. Officer Miller listened, absorbing every word. He didn't interrupt or offer his own opinions. He just listened, truly listened, for the first time in his life. Clara spoke not just as a retired judge, but as someone who had lived through the injustices she had fought to correct. Her words weren't just lessons in law, they were lessons in humanity. As the afternoon passed, Officer Miller found himself understanding more than he ever had before. He understood that justice wasn't just about laws written on paper. It was about empathy, about understanding the lived experiences of others. By the time he left Clara's apartment, he felt lighter, as though a burden had been lifted. He knew he had a long road ahead of him, but for the first time, he felt like he was headed in the right direction. He had a purpose now, something beyond the badge he wore. And it was all because Clara Johnson had opened his eyes. He was no longer just a police officer. He was someone who had a responsibility to his community, to people like Clara, who had fought for justice her entire life. The lessons he had learned would stay with him forever, and he knew that from that moment on. He would approach every situation with a new understanding of what it meant to serve. Weeks passed, and Officer Miller found himself more deeply involved in the community than he ever could have imagined. Each day, he woke up with a sense of purpose, not defined by the uniform he wore, but by the work he was doing to make amends for his past actions. His partnership with Clara Johnson had evolved into something meaningful. She had become his guide, teaching him not just about the law but about life, about the ways in which people's stories were shaped by experiences he had never understood. Together they worked on various community projects, from helping at local food banks to organizing events that brought people from different walks of life together. Clara's wisdom and calm demeanor made her an invaluable mentor, and Officer Miller began to understand the depth of her experience, the years of fighting for justice and standing up for the marginalized. One Saturday afternoon, Clara called him to meet her at a community center on the edge of town. As he entered, he saw her sitting at a table surrounded by a small group of people. Some were young adults, others were elderly, and a few were in between, but all of them seemed eager to speak with Clara. "There you are," Clara said with a smile as she stood up and waved him over. "We're just getting started. These are some of the people I've been working with. They've been through a lot, and I think it's time you meet them." Officer Miller nodded, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. He had learned so much from Clara already, but he knew this would be a different experience, one that would challenge him in ways he hadn't anticipated. As he sat down with the group, Clara introduced him to each person, and they began sharing their stories. One man spoke of being wrongfully convicted, another about the struggles of raising a child in a broken system. One woman spoke quietly about the daily microaggressions she faced as a black woman in a predominantly white neighborhood. Officer Miller listened closely to each of them, his heart heavy with the realization that he had never truly understood the weight of their experiences. "You see," Clara said as the room grew quieter, "this is what it's all about. It's not just about helping people in a superficial way. It's about listening. It's about understanding what they've been through." Officer Miller nodded. He had never truly understood what people went through when they had no one to listen to them. It was one thing to enforce the law, but another entirely to listen, to truly hear the pain in people's voices. As the meeting came to an end, Clara pulled him aside. "You've come a long way, officer," she said, her tone kind but serious. "But this is just the beginning. You're doing the right work, but you need to remember that this journey is ongoing. You have to stay committed to it. You can't stop learning, stop listening." Officer Miller took a deep breath. "I won't stop," he said firmly. "I know now that it's not just about policing. It's about helping people, really helping them, not just doing what's easy or expected." Clara smiled. "I'm proud of you. I'm glad you're on this path." That evening, Officer Miller sat in his car, reflecting on everything that had happened. He realized that the work he was doing now was more meaningful than anything he had done in his career. It wasn't about badges or authority. It was about understanding, compassion, and making a real difference. As he drove home, he couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. He had found something he had been searching for all along, and it wasn't something he could have ever found in a police manual or training session. It was the human connection, the stories, the lives, the struggles of the people around him, that had truly opened his eyes. And he knew that he had Clara to thank for that. It was a new chapter for him, one that he had never imagined, but one that he was ready to embrace fully. He had been given a second chance, and he wasn't going to waste it. Officer Miller stood in front of the community center that morning, his hands shoved deep into his pockets as he waited for Clara. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind, a steady stream of conversations, community projects, and moments of reflection. Each day, he found himself learning something new about people, about life, and most importantly, about himself. His days as a police officer had always been defined by the uniform, the badge, the authority he carried. But now, he realized it was more than that. It was about connection, understanding, and changing the way he viewed the world. He had arrived early for their meeting. It had become a routine now. Clara would guide him through the next steps of his personal journey, helping him navigate the complexities of serving the community with empathy rather than just power. As he stood outside the building, Officer Miller couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude. Clara had opened his eyes to a side of law enforcement he had never seen before. She had shown him the importance of listening, of truly understanding the people he served. He wasn't just enforcing the law anymore. He was trying to be a part of the solution, to help bridge the gap between authority and the community. Clara approached from across the parking lot, her calm presence immediately putting him at ease. She had that effect on him now. She walked up to him with a smile and a slight nod. "Ready for today?" she asked. Officer Miller nodded, a quiet sense of resolve in his expression. "I've been thinking a lot, Clara," he said, his voice steady but thoughtful, "about everything we've talked about. And I realize now that it's not just about the big things we do. It's about the small moments, the daily actions that can change the way people see each other." Clara looked at him, her eyes reflecting the wisdom she had gathered over the years. "Exactly. It's the small things that often matter the most. The kindness, the patience, the understanding. You've got to show people you care, even in the most mundane of situations." Officer Miller took a deep breath. He wasn't entirely sure he was ready for all that it meant, but he knew it was the right thing to do. "I want to do more. I've been trying to show up in ways I haven't before." volunteering, helping out at local shelters, just being there. But I know I need to do better. Clara smiled, a warm, approving smile that made him feel seen, as if she understood exactly what he meant. You are doing better, officer. It's not about being perfect. It's about showing up and doing the work, day by day. You've come a long way already, and there's still so much more to learn. As they walked into the community center, Clara led him to a group of people who had gathered for a meeting. These weren't strangers to Clara. These were the people who had worked alongside her for years, the ones she had mentored, the ones she had fought for in her time as a judge. Officer Miller was still getting to know many of them, but he had already seen the difference they were making in the community. The group welcomed him with nods and smiles, but it was clear they saw him differently now, less as the officer they had once been cautious of, and more as someone who was genuinely trying to help. As Clara introduced him to the group, Officer Miller felt the weight of his responsibility settle in. This was no longer about authority. It was about earning their trust, about showing them he was worthy of being part of the change. Over the next few hours, they discussed community issues, from improving neighborhood safety to supporting local youth programs. Each conversation was a reminder of how much work still needed to be done, but also how far they had come. Officer Miller contributed when he could, his perspective grounded in the knowledge that every effort, no matter how small, was a step toward progress. By the time the meeting ended, Officer Miller felt a shift in himself. It wasn't a huge change, but it was enough to make him realize that he had found a new sense of purpose. It was a purpose that wasn't tied to his badge or his uniform, but to the people he was helping, the lives he was touching. As they left the community center, Clara looked over at him. You're doing well, officer. Keep at it. You're on the right path. Officer Miller smiled, a feeling of pride swelling in his chest. Thanks, Clara. I couldn't have done it without you. Clara gave him a slight nod. It's your journey, officer. I'm just here to guide you when you need it. The two of them walked in silence for a moment, both reflecting on the work they had done together. For Officer Miller, this wasn't just a lesson in community service. It was a lesson in humanity, in understanding that true justice wasn't just about enforcing the law. It was about helping others, listening to their stories, and giving them a voice. He knew now that his journey had only just begun, but for the first time in his career, he felt ready to face whatever came next. Officer Miller was beginning to see the fruits of his efforts. It had been months since his encounter with Clara Johnson, and the changes in him were undeniable. His approach to his work had shifted, but more importantly, so had his approach to life. He found himself more patient, more understanding, and increasingly aware of the subtle ways in which people's lives could be impacted by small acts of kindness or neglect. The community had started to open up to him in ways he hadn't expected. He had become involved in various local initiatives, working with community leaders, local organizations, and even the youth in the area. But it was one afternoon that truly solidified his transformation. He had been invited to a town hall meeting where residents were gathered to discuss the rising tensions between law enforcement and the community. The room was filled with voices, each speaking from their own experience, their own frustrations. Officer Miller had been hesitant at first, unsure of what his role would be in such a setting. But Clara had encouraged him to go, to listen, to show the people that he was committed to understanding their concerns. He walked into the crowded room, his eyes scanning the sea of faces. Many of the people here were those he had met before, some from the community center and others through his volunteer work. There was a palpable tension in the air, but there was also a sense of hope. He took a seat at the back of the room, just as Clara had suggested, and listened as people shared their stories. It wasn't long before the conversation turned to the issue of police brutality, racial profiling, and the ways in which law enforcement had historically treated the community. He listened carefully, noting the frustration, the anger, and the pain in their voices. It was raw, honest, and it cut through him in ways he wasn't prepared for. As the meeting continued, Officer Miller found himself grappling with his own thoughts. He had been a part of the system that many of these people had been fighting against for years. He had been on the other side of their struggles, wearing the badge, enforcing the laws. But now, in this room, hearing their stories, he felt something shift in him. He wasn't just an officer. He was a part of this community, and that meant something. After a few more people spoke, the room fell silent for a moment. It was as if everyone was waiting for someone to say something that could change the tone of the conversation. Finally, Clara stood up. She wasn't an officer. She wasn't there to enforce the law. But she had the wisdom, the experience, and the presence that could not be ignored. She stepped to the front of the room, and all eyes turned to her. I know that the people in this room have felt the pain of being ignored, of being mistreated. She began, her voice calm but powerful. And I know that many of you feel that there is no way to fix what has been broken. But I'm here to tell you that change is possible. Change starts with each of us, with the way we treat each other, with the way we listen to each other. She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. I've spent my life in the courtrooms, fighting for justice. But I've learned that justice isn't just about laws or court decisions. It's about the way we treat each other in our everyday lives. It's about showing up for each other when it matters. Officer Miller stood up, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew this was his moment, the moment he had been waiting for. He had been a part of the system, but now he needed to be a part of the solution. He cleared his throat, his voice slightly unsteady but filled with conviction. I want to say something, he began. I know that I can't undo the harm that's been done, but I'm here to listen, to learn, and to be a part of the change. I know I've made mistakes, but I'm committed to doing better. I want to be someone you can trust, someone who stands with you, not against you. The room fell silent for a moment, and then, slowly, people began to nod, their eyes softening. It wasn't a magic solution, but it was a start. As the meeting ended, Officer Miller felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He had spoken from the heart, and for the first time in his career, he felt that he had done something meaningful. He had connected with the community, not as an officer with authority, but as a person who genuinely cared. Walking out of the meeting that day, Officer Miller knew that he had a long road ahead of him. There would be setbacks, challenges, and obstacles. But he also knew that he wasn't walking that road alone. Clara had shown him the way, and now it was up to him to continue the journey, to show up every day and prove that he was more than just the badge he wore. He was a part of the community, and that meant something. Officer Miller had been working tirelessly for months, engaging with the community, attending meetings, and listening to the people he had once been so distant from. The change was real. It was visible not only in his actions, but in the way others began to view him. He was no longer just a badge, a uniform, and an authority figure. He was a person, someone who understood that the law was only one part of the equation when it came to building trust and fostering a sense of safety. But there were moments of doubt, when he wondered if the changes were enough. When he was in the midst of a situation, dealing with a tense interaction, he would sometimes find himself questioning whether his new approach was working. He wasn't sure what the community expected of him now, and there were days when the weight of the responsibility felt heavier than ever. One evening, he found himself standing outside a community event, a rally for better education and safer neighborhoods. Clara had asked him to come, to show his face, to be a presence, and once again, he had followed her advice. She had been a guiding light for him, but the pressure was still there. As he stood there, watching families gather, children playing in the distance, and people chatting with one another, he couldn't help but feel a pang of insecurity. Was he truly making a difference? He was so focused on his thoughts that he didn't notice Clara walking up beside him until she spoke. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, her voice calm and knowing. He turned to face her, managing a faint smile. "I'm just thinking, Clara. I've been trying to show people that I'm different, that I'm here for them, but I don't always know if they believe me." Clara studied him for a moment, her expression soft but firm. "You can't control what others believe, officer. What you can control is your actions, your intentions. The rest will follow." He nodded, but the doubt still lingered in the back of his mind. He had learned so much from Clara, and yet, there were days when he still felt like an outsider. It was a feeling he had never known before, and it made him uncomfortable. "Do you ever feel like you're not enough?" he asked quietly. Clara chuckled softly, shaking her head. "Every day," she said. "But you don't need to be perfect, Officer Miller. You just need to show up, to keep trying, and to learn from the people around you." She paused, and then added, "And remember, it's not about you. It's about the work, the change, and the lives you're touching along the way." Her words resonated with him, more than he could express in that moment. He had been so focused on his own journey, his own transformation, that he had forgotten the bigger picture. It wasn't about proving himself to others. It was about being there, being consistent, and doing the work, no matter how difficult or uncomfortable it felt at times. As the rally continued, Officer Miller stayed close to Clara, offering help where it was needed, assisting with organizing efforts, and simply being present. The day passed without any major incidents, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of peace. It wasn't about the recognition or validation from others. It was about knowing, deep down, that he was on the right path. And for the first time, he felt truly connected to the community he served. That evening, as he drove home, he thought about how far he had come. There was still much work to do, but the doubts that had once consumed him were beginning to fade. His transformation was not just about him changing. It was about the way he now saw the world. He had learned to listen, to understand, and to act with empathy. The badge he wore was no longer a symbol of authority. It was a symbol of his commitment to service, to justice, and to the people who needed him most. As he pulled into his driveway, he sat for a moment in his car, taking a deep breath. For the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of fulfillment. It wasn't about the small victories or the fleeting moments of recognition. It was about the ongoing process, the quiet work that would never stop. And as he walked into his home, he knew that he wasn't alone on this journey. Clara was there, a constant reminder that change was possible, that it was worth the effort, and that no matter the challenges, it was always worth showing up. Officer Miller's life had become a quiet testament to change. His days were no longer defined by routine patrols or the unyielding demands of authority. Instead, they were shaped by the connections he had made, the lessons he had learned, and the ongoing journey of understanding that had begun months ago. As he sat in his car, looking out over the city, he could feel the weight of his transformation in every corner of his life. He no longer saw the world through the same lens. The sharp edges of his former mindset had softened, replaced by a deeper, more nuanced view of justice. He knew that his job wasn't just to enforce laws. It was to protect people, to stand by them, to be the person they could trust when they needed help. And that meant listening, not just acting. It meant showing empathy, not just issuing commands. He thought back to the day when everything had started to shift, to the first conversation with Clara, how she had shown him that true justice wasn't just about making the right decisions in a courtroom. It was about standing in solidarity with those who had no one else to turn to. It had been a slow process, a gradual transformation, but it was one that had changed his life forever. The feeling of uncertainty that had once haunted him now seemed distant, replaced by a quiet confidence that came from knowing he was doing the right thing. He had made mistakes, yes, but he was committed to doing better, and he knew that he couldn't undo the past, but he could shape the future. As he pulled into the parking lot of the community center, Clara was already there, standing by the entrance with a welcoming smile. She had become his mentor, his guide, and in many ways, his friend. "Hey there," she said as he approached. "You're right on time." He smiled back, the sense of camaraderie between them undeniable. "I try to be," he said, though the warmth in his voice was a stark contrast to the rigid officer he had once been. Clara's smile widened, and she gestured toward the door. "Come on in. We've got some important work to do today." As they entered the building, the atmosphere was different from what it had been months ago. There was a palpable sense of unity in the air, a feeling that they were all working together, not just for the community, but for each other. Officer Miller had become a trusted figure in this space, not because of his uniform, but because of the person he had become. He had earned the respect of the people he once served with authority, and that respect had transformed into something far more powerful, genuine connection. Inside, the room was filled with familiar faces. Some of them had become close friends, others were still strangers, but all of them shared the same desire for change. They were there for a meeting, but this time, it wasn't just about discussing problems. It was about finding solutions, working together, and making a real difference. As the meeting began, Officer Miller found himself actively participating in the discussions. He didn't sit in the back, quietly observing as he once had. Now, he was part of the conversation, offering ideas, asking questions, and contributing in ways that felt natural, as though he had always been a part of this community. He could see the impact of their work taking shape, from small changes to larger initiatives aimed at improving the neighborhood, providing support to those in need, and ensuring that everyone had a voice. As the meeting wrapped up, Clara pulled him aside. "You've come a long way," she said, her voice full of pride. "I'm proud of you." Officer Miller looked at her, a sense of fulfillment rising within him. I couldn't have done it without you, he admitted. Clara shook her head, a knowing smile on her face. You did the work. You made the choice to change. All I did was show you the way. He nodded, understanding what she meant. It had been his choice to step onto this path, to embrace the lessons, to take the actions that had led him here. But he also knew that Clara had been there every step of the way, helping him navigate the challenges, reminding him of what truly mattered. I still have a lot to learn, he said quietly, his voice tinged with humility. Clara placed a hand on his shoulder. You're on the right path, Officer Miller. And that's what matters. As they walked out of the building together, Officer Miller felt a sense of peace that he hadn't known before. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about being present, being consistent, and showing up every day to do the work. The road ahead wasn't easy, but it was a road he was ready to walk. With Clara by his side, he knew he wasn't